My name is Margaret Vance. At 68 years old, my life is etched into the very skyline of Chicago. I spent 4 decades building Vance Construction from a single, dusty toolbox into a multi-million-dollar empire that redefined the city's architecture. I know every bolt, beam, and blueprint of these skyscrapers, just as I thought I knew the hearts of my own family. But I was wrong. Buildings are logical, but human greed is a labyrinth that can swallow even the strongest foundations. After my husband passed away 6 years ago, my daughter Ashley became the absolute center of my universe. I wanted her to have the life I never had one, without calluses on her hands or the constant fear of unpaid bills. I made her the vice president of my firm, handed her the keys to a sprawling Lake Forest mansion, and provided her with a limitless corporate account. I thought I was giving her wings, but I was actually raising a monster of entitlement that would eventually turn on me. It was December 24th, a night meant for warmth and family traditions. I arrived at Ashley's magnificent home, my car loaded with carefully chosen gifts for my grandchildren, Leo and Sarah. The driveway was lined with flickering lanterns, and the heavy oak doors opened to reveal a foyer smelling of expensive pine and cinnamon. I walked in with a heart full of joy, carrying a rare vintage wine I had saved for a decade, specifically for a night that I believed would be a family milestone. "Grandma Margaret is here," the kids shouted, their voices echoing through the high ceilings. Leo and Sarah ran to me, and for a brief moment, the world felt perfect. Their hugs were tight and genuine, providing the only real warmth I would feel all night. I looked toward the grand staircase, expecting a smile from my daughter, but Ashley was standing there checking her reflection in a gold-framed mirror, looking more like a cold porcelain statue than a daughter welcoming her mother. The dining table was a masterpiece of opulence, set for 8 people with fine china and sparkling crystal that caught the light from the massive chandelier. "Are we expecting more guests, honey?" I asked, noticing the formal place cards at the head of the table. Ashley turned to me, her expression sharp and clinical. "David's parents, the Sterlings, are joining us. This is a crucial networking night for David's career, Mom. Please, try to be sophisticated and keep your old stories to yourself." Eleanor and George Sterling arrived exactly on time, moving through the house with an air of unearned royalty. Eleanor was draped in a fur coat that cost more than my first construction truck, and her diamonds were so large they looked like stage props. She didn't offer a hand or a smile. She simply looked through me with a cold, glassy stare, as if I were a piece of outdated office furniture that didn't fit the expensive, polished aesthetic of her son's perfect social life. As dinner was announced, we moved into the grand dining room. Naturally, I walked toward the head of the table. I had sat in that chair for 20 years, ever since my husband's passing. It was the rightful place for the matriarch of the family, the woman who provided the very roof over their heads and the food on their plates. But as I reached for the chair, Ashley stepped in front of me, her body language tense and aggressive. She blocked my path with a firm hand on my chest. "Mom, what are you doing?" "This seat is reserved for Eleanor," Ashley whispered, her voice dripping with a mix of embarrassment and cold authority. I froze, honestly believing for a split second that she was playing some kind of strange, cruel joke. "Ashley, this is my place. It has always been my place. I am the head of this family, and this is our tradition," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sudden, sharp pain of utter disrespect blooming in my chest. "Traditions change, Margaret," Eleanor interrupted, her voice smooth and venomous as she stood directly behind me. "In high society, the guest of honor always takes the head of the table. It's a matter of etiquette and class things I suppose you haven't quite mastered in your line of work." She smirked, clearly enjoying the moment of my public humiliation. I looked at David, my son-in-law, but he simply adjusted his tie and looked at the ceiling, refusing to meet my eyes. "Ashley, honey, please, I am your mother. I built everything you see around you," I said, my voice finally wavering. I was pleading for a shred of the loyalty I had shown her every day of her life. But my daughter's face was a mask of cold, hard ambition. To her, I wasn't a mother in that moment. I was just a social obstacle, an embarrassing reminder of her working-class roots that she wanted to bury under the Sterling's approval and their hollow, high-class standards. "Move, Mom, now. You're making this incredibly awkward for everyone," Ashley commanded, her eyes narrowing with a terrifying lack of affection. I stood my ground, my dignity flaring up like a dying ember. I had paid for the expensive turkey, the vintage wine, and the very mansion we were standing in. I refused to be relegated to a side chair like a servant in my own family's home. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like it would shatter the crystal glasses. Then the unthinkable happened. In a flash of blind, social climbing rage, Ashley grabbed my shoulders. She didn't just nudge me. She shoved me with a violent, sudden force that sent me staggering backward. My heels lost their grip on the polished hardwood floor, and I went down hard. My hip hit the floor with a sickening, heavy thud that rattled my teeth. The bottle of rare wine I was holding shattered against the floorboards, and a dark, red liquid began to soak into the white rug. The room plunged into a deafening silence, broken only by the sharp gasps of my grandchildren. I lay there on the cold floor, looking up at the woman I had raised, nurtured, and loved unconditionally. My dress was ruined, my body was aching, but the pain in my heart was far worse. Ashley didn't even flinch. She didn't reach down to help me up or ask if I was hurt. She simply smoothed her own expensive dress and looked down at me with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Get up, Margaret, and stop being so dramatic. Go sit in the side chair near the kitchen entrance." "Now," Ashley said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Eleanor Sterling stepped over the spilled wine, her heels clicking near my hand, and sat down in my chair. She smoothed her silk skirt with a satisfied expression and looked at her empty plate. "Much better. Now we can finally start this lovely dinner without any further interruptions," she remarked, as if I were nothing but a fly. Something inside me snapped and then went cold. A crystalline, terrifying clarity. The unconditional love I had for Ashley didn't just fade, it evaporated into the cold Chicago night. I stood up slowly, pushing myself off the floor with shaking hands. When Leo tried to run to me with tears in his eyes, David grabbed his arm and hissed at him to stay in his seat. I didn't say a single word to any of them. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, and I didn't plead. I simply turned and walked away. I didn't go to the side chair near the kitchen. I walked straight to the hallway, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and walked out of the house. The freezing December wind hit my face, but it felt honest and refreshing compared to the suffocating atmosphere of that dining room. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I took a deep, shaky breath and realized that the daughter I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who valued a chair more than her mother. I reached into my purse and dialed the only person I could trust at this hour. My lawyer, Richard. He answered on the third ring, his voice sounding warm and festive. "Margaret? Merry Christmas. Is everything okay?" he asked. I took a breath, my voice coming out steady and lethal. "No, Richard, it's not. I need you to initiate Protocol 0 for Vance Construction immediately. I want every corporate asset, every lease, and every credit line tied to Ashley and David revoked by dawn." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Margaret, are you absolutely sure? Protocol 0 is a total financial blackout that will freeze their lives by tomorrow morning. They'll lose the house, the cars, everything," Richard warned. They chose their guest of honor and their seat at the table. "Richard," I replied, watching the snow begin to fall on the windshield. "Now, let them see what that honor is worth when the checks stop clearing. Do it now." I drove back to my penthouse in the city, watching the Christmas lights of the Chicago skyscrapers, many of which were built by my own company. Ashley thought she was the queen of this city because she shared my last name and spent my money. She thought she was untouchable because she had a title I gave her. She was about to find out that a title without a foundation is just a house of cards. And I was the one who controlled the wind that was about to blow it all down. By 10 p.m., I was sitting in my living room with a glass of water, watching the digital execution on my tablet. One by one, the sub-accounts were closed. The luxury car leases were flagged for repossession. The mansion's corporate-funded utility accounts were scheduled for termination. My heart didn't ache anymore. It was as steady and cold as a ticking clock. I had spent my life building things up, but that night I realized that sometimes you have to demolish a structure to save the land. The silence in the dining room was deafening, broken only by the muffled sobs of Sarah. I lay there on the floor for what felt like an eternity, watching the expensive red wine spread across the white rug like a growing stain on our family's soul. My hip throbbed with a dull, insistent pain, but it was nothing compared to the cold realization that the daughter I had cherished for 42 years was gone. I wasn't looking at my child. I was looking at a stranger consumed by a hollow, desperate greed for social status. Ashley didn't offer her hand. She didn't even look me in the eye. She simply smoothed the silk of her designer sleeves with a terrifying calmness. "Stop being so dramatic, Margaret. You tripped because you were making a scene. Now, get up, clean yourself off, and go to the side chair near the kitchen entrance. We have guests of honor at this table, and you are currently an embarrassment to this family's reputation." Her voice was as cold and sharp as a Chicago winter, devoid of even a shred of empathy. Eleanor Sterling didn't wait for me to stand. She stepped over the spilled wine, her expensive heels clicking inches away from my fingers, and sat down in the chair I had occupied for 2 decades. She smoothed her skirt with a smirk of pure triumph, as if she had just won a war. Finally, a proper seat with a proper view, she remarked to the room, completely ignoring my presence on the floor. George Sterling let out a small mocking chuckle, while David carefully avoided looking in my direction entirely. I stood up slowly, pushing myself off the hardwood with trembling hands. My knees were shaking, but my mind was suddenly terrifyingly clear. Leo tried to run toward me, his face wet with tears, but David grabbed his arm and hissed at him to stay in his seat. I didn't say a single word. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't grant them the satisfaction of seeing me beg. I simply turned my back on them and walked out of the room, leaving the broken glass and the ruined rug behind me. I exited the house into the freezing Chicago night. The wind was howling and the temperature had dropped, but the icy air felt honest and refreshing compared to the suffocating, fake warmth of that dining room. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I watched the flickering Christmas lights in the windows of the mansion, a home I had bought and paid for, and I realized that I had been subsidizing my own destruction for years. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I dialed Richard, my personal attorney and the only man who knew the true architecture of my empire. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cheerful and full of holiday spirit. "Margaret? Merry Christmas. Is everything all right?" he asked. I took a deep, shaky breath, my voice coming out steady and lethal. "No, Richard, it's not. I need you to initiate Protocol 0 for Vance Construction immediately. I want every corporate asset revoked by dawn." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Richard knew exactly what that meant. Protocol 0 was a financial nuclear option I had designed years ago but never thought I would use. "Margaret, are you absolutely sure? This will trigger an immediate freeze on all sub-accounts. The house lease, the luxury vehicles, the unlimited credit lines, and even the corporate utility payments for Ashley and David will be terminated. They'll be left with nothing but their personal cash. They chose their guest of honor and their seat at the table. Richard, I replied, watching the snow begin to coat the hood of my car. They believe that status is something you take from others, not something you build with your own hands. If Eleanor Sterling is so important to them, let her pay for their dinner tomorrow. Revoke everything. I want the locks changed on the Lake Forest property and the corporate cards declined at the next swipe. Do it now, and don't stop until they are empty. I drove back to my penthouse in the city, the silence of the drive punctuated only by the occasional notification on my tablet. One by one, I watched the notifications of account closures roll in. Ashley and David thought they were the rulers of their social circle because they spent my money and used my name. They were about to learn a very painful lesson. A title without a foundation is just a house of cards. And I was the one who controlled the wind that was about to blow it all down. On Christmas morning, the world was white with snow and the Sterlings were expecting a grand celebration. Ashley had planned a luxury brunch at the Drake Hotel, one of the most prestigious spots in Chicago. Intending to further cement her bond with Eleanor, she dressed in her finest furs, believing that the previous night's unpleasantness was already forgotten. She had no idea that while she was sleeping, the digital foundation of her entire life had been methodically dismantled. When the $2,500 brunch bill arrived at the table, Ashley handed over her black corporate card with a self-assured smile. The waiter returned 5 minutes later, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this card has been declined." Ashley laughed, a hollow, nervous sound. "That's impossible. Try it again. It's a platinum executive account." The waiter shook his head. "I tried 3 times, ma'am. The system says the account has been closed by the primary cardholder. Do you have another form of payment?" Ashley fumbled through her purse, pulling out 2 more cards, both of which were met with the same cold response from the machine. "All your accounts associated with Vance Construction have been terminated," the waiter said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Ashley's face turned a deep, humiliated shade of crimson. Eleanor Sterling raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow, her expression shifting from feigned friendship to sharp, judgmental disdain in a heartbeat. "How incredibly tacky, Ashley," Eleanor remarked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was under the impression that you were a high-ranking executive, not someone who struggles to pay for a simple holiday meal. I suppose the Vance name isn't as solid as we were led to believe." George Sterling sighed and checked his gold watch. "This is a waste of our time, George," Eleanor added, standing up. "We didn't come to Chicago to be associated with people who have credit problems." Outside the hotel, the humiliation reached its peak. As they waited for the valet, a heavy tow truck pulled up. The driver hopped out and began hooking up their white Tesla. "Hey, what are you doing? That's my car," Ashley screamed. The driver didn't even look at her as he checked his clipboard. "Corporate lease revoked by Margaret Vance at 6 a.m. this morning. I have orders to take this directly to the company impound lot. You'll have to take the bus, lady." The Sterlings didn't wait to hear the rest. They flagged down a luxury taxi and climbed inside without a second glance at Ashley or David. "Call us when you've managed to sort out your unfortunate family finances," George said as the taxi door slammed shut. Ashley stood on the sidewalk in her expensive heels, surrounded by the slush of Michigan Avenue, watching her guests of honor disappear. For the first time in her life, she was seeing the world without the protection of my money. Desperate, they returned to the Lake Forest mansion in an expensive Uber they could barely afford, only to find the heavy iron gates locked. A security team from Ironclad, a firm I had hired personally, stood at the entrance. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your access codes have been deactivated. This property is owned by the Vance Family Trust, and the trustee has revoked your right of residency effective immediately. You are no longer authorized to enter these premises." "This is my house. My children are in there," Ashley screamed, hammering on the cold metal bars. The guard remained unmoved. "Your children, Leo and Sarah, are safe inside with their nanny. Miss Margaret has already arranged for their care. However, you and Mr. David are required to vacate the area. We have one box of your personal essentials here by the gate. The rest of your belongings will be held in storage until the legal proceedings are finalized. You have 10 minutes to leave." Ashley's phone finally rang. It was me? She answered it with a scream of pure desperation. "Mom, what are you doing? You've locked us out of our own home. You've canceled our cards. We're standing on the street in the snow. Have you lost your mind? It's Christmas." Her voice was hysterical, but I felt nothing but a cold, quiet resolve. I sat in my quiet penthouse, watching the snow fall over the city, and realized that for the first time in years, I was the one in control. "Traditions change, Ashley. Isn't that what you told me last night?" I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You told me I didn't deserve the head of your table. Well, you don't deserve the head of my company or the comfort of my home. You wanted to play the high society game with the Sterlings, so go ahead. Call Eleanor. I'm sure she'll give you a room in her mansion, right? Oh, wait, she won't even pay for your coffee now. Find a side chair in a motel, Ashley. You're done." I hung up the phone and turned it off. I spent the rest of my Christmas morning at a local community shelter, serving warm meals to people who truly had nothing. These people, who had lost everything, showed more gratitude and grace than my daughter ever had. As I handed a bowl of soup to a shivering man, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a CEO anymore. I was a woman who was finally cleaning house, starting with the people closest to me. Monday morning in downtown Chicago arrived with a brutal, gray sky and a wind that sliced through the canyons of the Loop. I arrived at the Vance Construction headquarters at my usual time, but the atmosphere was electric. My security team, briefed by Richard over the weekend, stood like statues at the glass revolving doors. They knew that today wasn't just another business day. It was the day the Queen Mother reclaimed her throne and purged the palace of those who had betrayed her. Ashley arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, looking like she hadn't slept a wink. She was dressed in a sharp power suit, trying to project an image of authority, but her eyes were frantic and bloodshot. She marched up to the security turnstile and swiped her executive badge with a practiced, arrogant flick of her wrist. Instead of the familiar green light, a harsh, buzzing red flash illuminated the lobby, accompanied by a loud access denied message that echoed off the marble walls. "There must be a glitch with the system. I'm the vice president of this company. Let me through this instant," Ashley screamed at the young security guard. The man, who had always been intimidated by her before, didn't even flinch. He looked her straight in the eye with a professional coldness. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this badge has been permanently deactivated. Your employment was terminated for gross misconduct at 6 a.m. You are no longer authorized to enter this building." Dozens of employees, from junior clerks to senior managers, began to gather in the lobby, whispering and watching the spectacle. The woman who had spent years belittling them, demanding perfection while offering only criticism, was now being treated like a common trespasser. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Ashley's face turned a humiliating shade of purple as she realized she was being disgraced in front of the very people she had looked down upon for a decade. David tried to call my direct line from the lobby, but he quickly found that his number had been erased from the system and blocked. He was a man who lived for optics and networking, a coward who hid behind the Vance name to feel powerful. Now, standing in the lobby without a badge or a title, he looked remarkably small and insignificant. He tried to argue with the head of security, but he was told that if he didn't leave immediately, they would call the Chicago police. I called an emergency general meeting in the main conference room. The air was thick with tension as I sat at the head of the long oak table, my rightful place. "Effective immediately," I announced, my voice echoing with the authority of the woman who built this firm. "Mark, our lead foreman, who has been with me since we laid the first brick of this empire, is our new chief operating officer. We are returning to our roots. We are no longer a playground for social climbers. From this moment on, Vance Construction will focus on what we do best, building with integrity and honor," I told my staff. There will be no more vanity projects, no more catering to high society friends, and no more entitlement. Anyone who disagrees with this new direction is free to follow Ashley out the door today. We build for the people of Chicago, not for the approval of people like the Sterlings. A wave of relieved applause broke the silence. Ashley waited outside the skyscraper for nearly 10 hours, pacing the sidewalk in the freezing slush. When I finally walked out to my car, she ran toward me, her designer coat stained and her hair a mess. "Mom, please! You have to talk to me. We have nowhere to go. The hotel took the last of our cash, and David's father isn't answering his phone. You can't just throw your own daughter onto the street like a stray dog." She was hysterical, her voice cracking. I stopped and looked at her, but I didn't see my daughter. I saw the woman who had pushed me to the floor for a guest of honor. "Where are the Sterlings, Ashley? Where is that high society you were so desperate to impress that you humiliated your own mother?" I asked, my voice calm and low. She looked at the ground, unable to answer. "They only liked the Vance in your name, Ashley. Now that the money is gone, you're just a girl in a cheap suit to them. Go find them." "They won't even take my calls, Mom. Eleanor blocked me," she sobbed. I leaned in closer so only she could hear me. "Of course she did. Parasites don't stick around when the host is dead. You traded your mother for a lie, and now you have to live with the truth. I am not your bank anymore, and I am not your safety net. You told me traditions change, and today, the tradition of me paying for your mistakes has officially ended." I got into my car and drove away, leaving her in the cold. I had to be strong, even though a part of me wanted to cry. I knew that if I gave in now, if I wrote her even one more check, she would never understand the gravity of her betrayal. This wasn't about the money, it was about the soul of my child. I drove through the city, watching the workers on our construction sites. They were the ones who deserved my respect, not the woman who thought a chair at a table was more important than the woman who provided it. Ashley and David were forced to check into a crumbling motel on the outskirts of the city, near the industrial districts. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors fighting, and the smell of stale cigarettes permeated everything. It was a brutal contrast to the silk sheets and climate-controlled rooms of their Lake Forest mansion. David spent the night pacing the small room, nursing a bottle of cheap whiskey and blaming Ashley for ruining their connection to the Sterlings. Every morning, Ashley woke up not to the sound of a gardener or a silent house, but to the roar of semi-trucks on the highway and the sound of police sirens. For the first time in her adult life, she was forced to face the world without the invisible shield of my millions. She realized that without the vice president title and the designer clothes, people didn't look at her with respect. They didn't look at her at all. She was becoming invisible, just like she tried to make me. The stress began to tear their marriage apart. David, who had only married Ashley because of the Vance empire, showed his true colors. He stopped pretending to be the charming husband and became a bitter, resentful man. He blamed her for her temper and her stupidity during the Christmas dinner. They spent their nights in that small motel room screaming at each other, two ghosts fighting over the ruins of a life they never actually earned for themselves. I took Leo and Sarah to our family cabin in Wisconsin for the weekend. We spent the days hiking through the snow and the nights reading by the fireplace. They were confused at first, but I could see the tension leaving their small bodies. They didn't have to listen to the constant talk of money, status, and important people. They just got to be children again. Leo told me he actually liked the cabin better than the big mansion because it feels like people actually live here. On Sunday evening, Leo sat next to me and asked the question I knew was coming. "Grandma, is Mom ever coming back to us?" I looked at him, my heart aching but my resolve firm. "She will come back, Leo, but only when she finds the heart she lost somewhere along the way. She's on a journey right now to learn how to be a real person, not just a name on a business card. We have to let her walk that path alone so she can find her way back to the truth." Ashley spent the next week trying to apply for executive positions at other construction firms in Chicago, She used her Ivy League degree and her years as VP to try and secure a new life. But she quickly learned that the business world is small, and news of her public disgrace had traveled fast. Every CEO in the city knew that she had betrayed the woman who built the industry. Her resume was tossed in the trash before she even left the lobby of every office she visited. Her phone calls were ignored, and her emails went unanswered. She was radioactive. The very name Vance that she had used as a weapon was now a wall she couldn't climb over. She realized that her reputation wasn't based on her talent, but on my grace, and she had burned that bridge to ash. By the end of the second week, she was down to her last $50, and the motel manager was knocking on her door, demanding payment for the next 7 nights in advance. The final blow came when she woke up on a Tuesday morning to find the room empty. David was gone. He had taken his few belongings and the last of their emergency cash from her purse while she was sleeping. He left a short, cruel note on the nightstand. "I didn't sign up for a life in a motel with a waitress's daughter. Good luck, Ashley. Don't call me." He had fled back to his parents, hoping to beg for their forgiveness and leave her to drown in the mess they created. Ashley sat on the edge of the stained motel bed, clutching the note, and finally let out a scream that had been building for years. She was truly alone. No mother, no husband, no money, and no future. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror over the dresser and didn't recognize the woman looking back. She was at rock bottom, stripped of every lie she had ever told herself. It was in that moment of absolute despair that she finally began to see the ghost of the girl she used to be. Alone in that motel room, Ashley stared at her empty hands. Hunger eventually forced her out. She wandered into a small, grease-scented diner near the highway, where a help-wanted sign hung in the window. The owner, a burly man in a stained apron, eyed her rumpled business suit skeptically. "You looking for a job? Or did you get lost on your way to the country club?" He croaked, wiping his hands on a towel. "I need a job," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The work is hard, the shifts are 12 hours, and the tips are slim. We don't need princesses here. We need people who know how to grind," the owner said. Ashley nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. That same day, she put on an apron and began carrying cheap coffee to truckers, trying not to look at her reflection in the glass so she wouldn't see the shadow of the former VP. She was starting over in a world that didn't care about her last name. The first days were hell. Her legs ached from walking on the sticky floor, and her hands, once perfectly manicured, were covered in small burns from hot cups and cuts from cleaning. She scrubbed toilets, washed greasy dishes, and endured the rudeness of customers she once wouldn't have even noticed on the street. But every evening, returning to her tiny room above the diner, she felt a strange, bitter pride. This was the first money she had ever earned that wasn't just handed to her. I knew every step she took. A private investigator sent me reports and photos. I saw her carrying heavy trays and saw how tired her shoulders were at the end of a shift. My mother's heart ached. I wanted to rush in, grab her, and bring her back to the warmth of our world. I knew if I saved her now, she would forever remain the woman capable of pushing her mother for the approval of strangers. She had to hit rock bottom to find the human inside her. One day, by some twist of fate, Eleanor Sterling walked into that diner with her friends. Their expensive car had broken down nearby. They entered the establishment as if they were stepping into a sewer. Eleanor, adjusting her diamonds, didn't even glance at the waitress's face as she approached their table. To her, service staff was just part of the furniture, unworthy of attention. Ashley froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she forced herself to present them with the menus. "This table is sticky and it smells like cheap grease. How do people even eat here?" Eleanor complained loudly, pushing away her plate. She looked at Ashley as if she were a ghost, demanding fresh coffee and complaining about the slow service. Ashley listened to that poisonous voice, which not long ago had seemed like the pinnacle of aristocratism, and now saw in it only emptiness and baseness. She realized that for this woman, she had destroyed her life, and that thought was more painful than any fall. "I'll bring you another cup right away, ma'am," Ashley replied calmly, not a single muscle in her face flinching. She no longer felt the need to justify herself or impress this woman. In that moment, the mirror of her former social life shattered completely. She saw before her not a guest of honor, but an arrogant, empty woman who wasn't worth a drop of the effort Ashley had put in to please her. It was her personal awakening amidst the smell of burgers and cheap air freshener. As she left, Eleanor demonstratively left a 10-cent coin on the table as a tip. "Buy yourself some decent soap, sweetie," she tossed over her shoulder. Ashley took that coin and squeezed it tightly in her fist. She didn't throw it away. She put it in her apron pocket as a talisman, a reminder of how low one can fall when seeking the value of one's life in the eyes of others. That coin was worth more to her than all the platinum cards I had once given her without condition. Meanwhile, Vance Construction flourished under my direct management. We started a massive project building affordable housing and schools in South Chicago. I returned to the construction sites, to this world of concrete and blueprints I once created. I wore a helmet and boots again, talking to workers in their language. This return to my roots gave me strength I thought I had lost over years of office life. I again felt the pulse of the city I built with my own hands. I felt younger and more energetic. Every morning I saw in the mirror not just a wealthy widow, but the founder of an empire who knows the price of every brick. We turned down pretentious contracts in favor of projects people actually needed. My employees saw this change and worked with twice the effort. The atmosphere of intrigue and arrogance that Ashley and David had brought vanished, replaced by honest labor and mutual respect, just like in the good old days. David tried to sue me for a share of the business and moral damages. My lawyers, the best in Illinois, simply crushed his claims in the first pre-trial hearing. Without my support, he was nobody, a man without talent, connections, or money. Soon I learned he had taken a job at a car wash, where his skills in communicating with the elite were only useful for sucking up to the owners of expensive cars he once considered his own. He was finally seeing life from the ground up. As for the Sterlings, their fall was even more rapid. It turned out their empire was held together by massive loans and schemes they hoped to cover with a deal from my company. When I closed the doors on them, their creditors tore them apart in weeks. The IRS began an investigation, and their assets were frozen. All of Chicago watched with interest as the kings of society turned into bankrupts with questionable reputations. Their house of cards had finally collapsed under its own weight. They lost their mansion, yacht, and memberships in exclusive clubs. The very friends they lived for turned their backs on them instantly. It was a classic Chicago story, a city that loves winners but doesn't forgive those who build success on lies. The Sterlings vanished from the radar of the social chronicles as quickly as morning fog over Lake Michigan. Justice prevailed, but it brought me no joy. I was waiting for only one thing: the healing of my daughter's soul. Once a week, I drove past that diner in my old SUV, not stopping. I saw Ashley through the glass. She walked between tables, her movements becoming confident and fast. She no longer looked like a victim of circumstances. Something of that Margaret Vance who once started her path with a shovel in hand appeared in her. She lived in a tiny studio above the cafe, took the bus, and washed her own things. Her world had become tiny, but it had become real and honest. Ashley began helping the diner owner with the bookkeeping. It turned out her Harvard degree still found a use in real life. She found errors in calculations that had been eating up the establishment's profits for years, and helped the old man optimize taxes. She didn't ask for money for this, she just wanted to be useful. The cafe owner began to treat her like a daughter, and this communication with a simple, honest person, gave her more moral lessons than all the social events combined. Finally, 6 months later, I decided it was time. I didn't wear diamonds or take a limousine. I dressed in a simple work jacket and arrived at the diner on an ordinary Tuesday. It was quiet between breakfast and lunch. I entered, and the bell over the door jingled, making Ashley look up from her notebook. She froze, seeing me. In her eyes was neither fear nor anger, only a deep, endless sadness and a shadow of timid hope. The princess had finally been replaced by a human. I sat at a back table by the window. Ashley approached me with a coffee pot in hand. Her movements were professional, but her hands were noticeably shaking. She carefully placed the cup and poured the coffee without spilling a drop. "Hello, Mrs. Vance," she said quietly. She no longer called me Mom, as if understanding that this name had to be earned again. There was a humility in her voice I hadn't heard since her childhood. This was the beginning of our long journey. "Coffee, please, Ashley," I replied, looking at her hands reddened from work. She stood nearby, waiting for further words, but I was silent, giving her the chance to speak first. I washed this table 3 times before you sat down, but it still seems to me it's not clean enough for you," she whispered with a sad smile. I saw that she was really trying. She was no longer the woman who demanded respect. She was the one who was trying to earn it back through labor. We talked for almost an hour. She didn't ask for forgiveness in every phrase. She didn't beg for money and didn't complain about her hard life. She talked about the people she met here, about the truckers who miss their families, about the old people who come for a free coffee refill. She began to see the world through the eyes of those she previously despised. "I'm learning, Mom," she finally said, and that word escaped her lips naturally. "I'm learning to build my life anew." I listened to her and saw how someone new was being born from the ashes of the old Ashley. The same Vance sparked persistence and willpower had woken up in her. She didn't break under the weight of my punishment. She was tempered in it. I left a $5 bill on the table, a normal tip so as not to embarrass her, and stood up to leave. "Come to the site in South Chicago on Monday, Ashley. We need an assistant foreman to check site documentation, in a helmet and boots." "They miss you very much, Ashley," I said, and at that moment, the mask of calmness on her face finally cracked. Tears immediately filled her eyes and rolled down her cheeks, leaving tracks on a face untouched by makeup. "I miss them terribly too, Mom. Every night I see them in my dreams. But I wasn't ready to meet them before. It seemed to me that I still smelled of that arrogance and dirt I brought into our house that Christmas," she whispered, covering her face. "You are cleaner and more sincere now than ever in your silk dress, Ashley. Your hands smell of honest work, not someone else's money," I softly said. Before leaving, I put a $500 bill on the table. Ashley looked at the money in fear and tried to return it. "This isn't a handout, daughter. This is your first investment in new clothes for work. You'll need sturdy jeans and good boots if you're going to the site on Monday. I'll see you at 8 a.m. Monday morning, as the sun began to gold the tops of the Chicago skyscrapers, Ashley stood at the gates of our new site in South Chicago. She wore simple work jeans, a flannel shirt, and those very boots. In her hands, she clutched an old thermos. She looked intimidated looking at the giant cranes and scurrying workers, but in her eyes was a determination I hadn't seen in years. She was no longer waiting for doors to be opened for her. She was ready to walk through them herself. "I want to work, Mark. Give me any task," she firmly said to our new executive director. Mark, who had known her since childhood and saw her rise and fall, looked at her for a long time before handing her an orange helmet. "Fine, Vance. We'll start with site documentation and checking the rebar. You'll be the assistant to the junior foreman. The work is dusty, hard, and without air conditioning. And keep in mind, no favors because of the last name. Here, you're just a cog." Ashley started from the very bottom. Her workplace was now in a stuffy construction trailer piled with blueprints and concrete samples. She checked invoices, tracked brick deliveries, and conducted tool inventories. It was exhausting, routine work under the constant noise of jackhammers and the shouts of workers. At the end of the day, her clothes were covered in gray construction dust, and her back ached with fatigue. But she never once complained or asked for a break. The workers initially whispered behind her back, remembering how the princess used to come here in a limousine and fastidiously crinkle her nose at the smell of sweat and oil. They arranged small tests for her, gave her impossible deadlines, or forgot to hand over important reports. Ashley silently endured all the mockery. She arrived at the site before everyone else and left last, thoroughly studying every blueprint. She didn't try to command, she tried to understand how it's built. She lived in a tiny apartment in a working-class neighborhood that I provided her against her future salary. Every morning she took the bus along with other construction workers, listening to their talk about food prices and housing problems. This world, which was previously only numbers in reports for her, found faces and voices. She was no longer a ghost from high society. She became part of this giant living machine that creates the city's foundation. She finally began to feel the ground. One day, an accident happened at the site, poorly. A secured beam began sliding off a crane right over where a young intern was working. Everyone froze in numbness, but Ashley, who was nearby, reacted instantly. She shoved the guy aside with force a second before the heavy metal crashed onto the concrete. She herself barely managed to jump back, badly scratching her arm on the rebar, but a person's life was saved. At that moment, a silence filled with new meaning fell over the site. The whole crew who saw this act froze, and then timid applause broke out. The old foreman approached her, handed her a clean rag for the wound, and silently nodded. From that day on, they stopped calling her the owner's daughter or princess. For them, she became simply Vance, a person who is not afraid of dirt and is ready to risk herself for another. She earned their respect not by position, but by deed. This was her first real victory in life, much more valuable than a Harvard degree. After the shift, I called her into my office. Seeing her bandaged arm and tired but glowing face, I struggled to hold back tears of pride. "You saved a life today, Ashley. The company is proud of you," I said, trying to maintain a business-like tone. She just nodded and thanked me, not trying to use this case to beg for a promotion or money. She just did what she had to. And this modesty was the best proof of her deep transformation. She was finally becoming a real Vance. She gradually became a true leader, but now it was leadership based on knowledge and empathy. She began making suggestions to improve safety at sites and optimize the workers' daily lives. Her ideas were practical and sound because she herself saw these problems from the inside. I watched her through cameras and Mark's reports, and my heart filled with peace. From the ashes of that selfish woman, the true heiress of the Vance Empire was being born, forged in the heat of hard labor. One evening, we stood together on the upper tier of a building under construction, looking at the lights of Chicago. "Mom, I used to think these skyscrapers were just monuments to our wealth," she quietly said, adjusting her helmet. "But now I see in every window the labor of hundreds of people, their sweat, their hopes. I'm proud that we build schools, not just elite offices." I looked at her and saw in her eyes the same spark that once burned in her father's eyes. She finally understood. "Previously I built my pride," she continued, "and now I want to build something that will remain after us and bring benefit. Thank you for giving me this chance, even though I completely didn't deserve it." I put my hand on her shoulder. "We all make mistakes, daughter. The main thing is to find the strength in yourself, to admit them, and fix the foundation of your soul. You did it. You are building yourself anew, and this is the most important construction in your life." We stood in silence for a long time. Our weekly dinners became a tradition. We no longer went to expensive restaurants where one had to keep one's back straight and watch every word. We ordered pizza or cooked simple food at home. We discussed technical details of projects, the strength of concrete, and new heating systems. Ashley shared stories from the workers' lives, and we laughed at their jokes. It was communication between two equal people, two partners connected not only by blood, but by a common cause and mutual respect. Every time she found a reason to apologize for that Christmas, "I still can't believe I could do that to you, Mom. That shove, it haunts me in nightmares," she admitted once. "The monster that lived in me died, Ashley. Don't resurrect it with your memories. Only who you are now is important," I replied. She had indeed become a different person, quieter, deeper, and incredibly strong. All the superficial glitter was replaced by internal steel and real character. David, having learned through mutual acquaintances that Ashley was working with me again, tried to contact her. He sent her flowers and messages full of lying promises that he realized everything and wants to start with a clean slate. But Ashley didn't even open his letters. She knew that he was attracted not to her, but to the shadow of the Vance empire, which began to fall on her life again. "I don't need a man who abandoned me in a motel with $40, she told me. She became truly independent. She no longer needed the Sterling's approval or expensive gifts to feel her significance. Her confidence now came from within, from the realization of her value as a professional and as a human being. She took back the Vance surname, but now this name wasn't just a pass to high society for her, was a responsibility and pride for her family. She became the daughter I had always dreamed of, but feared I would never see. The legacy was safe. Leo and Sarah began spending every weekend with her at the site. They watched with delight as their mom commanded the unloading of materials or checked blueprints. They saw a hero in her, and this was the best reward for her. "Mom, you're like Superman now, only in a helmet," Leo shouted, running through safe zones of the site. Ashley glowed with happiness, realizing she was giving her children the right example, an example that success is achieved by labor, not by whims. We became a true family. There were no longer secrets, grievances, or attempts to manipulate each other. Our house again filled with children's laughter and the aroma of home-cooked food. I saw how Leo and Sarah grew in an atmosphere of love and truth, and I knew they would never repeat their mother's mistakes because they saw her path of redemption. Our foundation was now made of the strongest material in the universe: honesty and forgiveness. We were ready for a new stage. A new Christmas was approaching. I decided to arrange this holiday in a special way to consolidate the lesson we all learned during this hard year. I wanted to see how deeply the roots of humility and love had grown into my daughter's soul. I knew that this evening would become the final point in our story of transformation. All of Chicago was preparing for the holiday, and in our office, too, there was anticipation of something important and bright. We were ready to meet this Christmas. It was December 24th. Chicago again plunged into festive bustle, and a fluffy white snow covered the city's streets. I was preparing dinner in my penthouse, but this time, everything was different. There were no hired catering services, no gold utensils and pretentious decorations. The table was set for 4, me, Ashley, and my 2 grandchildren. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted turkey and homemade pie we baked with Sarah. It was an atmosphere of a true home where every object had meaning. Ashley arrived exactly at 6 p.m. She wore a simple, elegant dark blue dress bod with her own salary she earned checking concrete and rebar at cold sites. In her hands, she held a small box with handmade Christmas decorations they made with the children last weekend, and a bottle of good but simple wine. In her eyes, that feverish glitter of a socialite no longer shone. The quiet confidence of a woman who knows who she is without any titles shone there. She was finally home. When it was time to sit at the table, Ashley froze for a moment in the dining room doorway. She looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, the very place because of which she had shoved me to the floor a year ago. A shadow of old pain reflected on her face, but it was quickly replaced by a soft smile. She didn't take a step toward that place. Instead, she silently approached the most modest side chair, closer to the kitchen, and began helping the children lay out napkins. "What are you doing, Ashley? Why are you sitting there?" I asked, watching her. She looked up at me with a gaze full of sincerity and warmth. "Mom, this place is perfect. I'm just happy to sit at this table, in this house, near you and the children." I realized it doesn't matter what chair you sit on if gratitude lives in your heart. I'm no longer chasing honorable places. I just want to be worthy of being here, she quietly replied. At that moment, I realized my lesson had been learned. I approached her, took her hand, and gently lifted her from the chair. I led her to the place next to mine, at the right hand of the head of the table. "You've gone through fire, daughter. You washed the falsity off yourself and proved that the blood of Vance builders flows in your veins. You are no longer a guest at this table. You are its support. Take your place by right." Ashley hugged me more tightly than ever before. It was an embrace of a person who finally found the way back to the truth. We ate, laughed, and remembered funny cases from the site. The children talked about their successes at school, and Ashley listened to them with such attention she had never shown before when she was busy with calls from the Sterlings. No one remembered those who betrayed us. We learned that Eleanor Sterling was trying to sell off the remains of her wardrobe to pay for lawyers in a bankruptcy case, but this news didn't cause us gloating, only light pity for people whose lives were built on sand. Ashley officially became the head of our new social projects department. Now she built not just buildings, but a future for those who were unlucky in life. She oversaw the construction of shelters and educational centers, working with the same passion she previously chose designer furniture with. She found her true calling to serve people, not use them. All of Chicago began talking about the new Ashley Vance, and this time it was words of respect for her character, not her bank account. After dinner, Ashley and I went out on the balcony, wrapping ourselves in warm blankets. Under us, Chicago shone with lights, the city I built all my life. "You know, Mom," she said, looking at the dark waters of Lake Michigan, "that shove last year. It was the most terrible thing I did, but it was the best thing that happened to me. Without that fall on the floor, I would have never seen how low I fell in soul. Thank you for having the strength to be tough with me." I looked at her with pride. This story is not just a chronicle of a family quarrel. It's a reminder to each of us. Never forget those who laid the foundation of your well-being. It's easy to be high society when someone behind your back pays the bills and solves problems. But a person's true greatness manifests not at the moment they sit at the head of the table, but at the moment they are ready to stand up and yield that place to the one who truly earned it. Respect is built by years of honest labor. That chair at the head of the table is not just furniture. It's a symbol of responsibility, wisdom, and love. If you are ready to betray your parents for the approval of strangers, you are building your life on a swamp. And when the storm comes, and it definitely will, your house will collapse like the Sterling's house of cards. Take care of your roots, for it is they that feed your crown and allow you to reach for the sky. Without them, you are just tumbleweed that the wind of fate will throw into a ditch. My empire is now in reliable hands, not because Ashley has a diploma from a prestigious university, but because she now has calluses on her hands and humility in her heart. She knows the price of every brick and every human word. The Sterlings and Davids come and go like seasonal fashion, but true values honesty, labor, and loyalty to family remain eternal, like the granite foundations of our skyscrapers. We continue to build Chicago, and now her signature stands next to mine on the blueprints. I retire with a light heart. I saw how my daughter lost everything to find the most important thing herself. She learned to value not the glitter of diamonds, but the light in her children's eyes and the respect in the eyes of simple workers. Our past Christmas was a catastrophe that saved our future. I fall asleep in the silence of my house, knowing that when my grandchildren grow up, they will know a place at the head of the table must be earned by deeds, not demanded by right of birth. Thank you for listening to my story to the end. Perhaps it will make some of you call your mother or father and just say thank you. Remember that life is too short to waste it on fake friends and the pursuit of status. True luxury is the opportunity to look into the eyes of your loved ones without shame and know that you are loved not for what you have, but for who you are. May there always be warmth in your home, and may the place at the head of the table be occupied by the one who brings peace. The camera smoothly rises over night Chicago, showing a panorama of the city. On one of the sites under construction, a bright neon sign lights up, Vance and Daughter Construction. Snow continues to fall, covering the city with a white blanket of purity and hope. The music becomes louder, more solemn, and gradually fades out. The screen shows the inscription, "True greatness is in gratitude. Fade to black. The end."